This is the Aftermarket Radio Network. Welcome to another episode of Business by the Numbers. I'm your host, Hunt Emrys, CPA with Parmelis & Associates. Before we get into that, I just want to stop and say thank you to you and the rest of the dedicated listeners. Reminder, if you have any questions that you want answered on here or even answered in private, shoot me an email at podcast@Parmelis and be happy to answer your question. And hey, if you want to, and it's a good enough question, it'll be on the next mailbox episode, which I promise you is coming here in the next couple weeks. And lastly, I cannot forget our dedicated sponsor, NAPA TRACS and Promotive, for being loyal supporters of the show. You guys have heard me talk about them. You've heard the ad reads that I've done so wonderfully. If you want to give them a shout out, if you're looking for a new shop management software, reach out to NAPA TRACS and let them know that we sent you. And again, struggling to find those right people to fit into your team. Maybe you've been hiring people, but they just haven't been the right fit on this. Leave it to the professionals. Give Promotive a call and let them do the heavy lifting for you. I know they can take care of you just like they have tons of other listeners. Thank you to NAPA TRACS. Thank you to Promotive. And I hope you guys check them out if you need them. For over 30 years, NAPA TRACS has made selecting the right shop management system easy by offering the best, most comprehensive SMS in the industry. We'll prove to you that TRACS is the single best shop management system in the business. Visit them online at napatracs.com. That's NAPATRACS.com. If you're looking for a full-service staffing solution that does everything from sourcing, qualifying, creating job descriptions, scheduling interviews, to negotiating job offers, Promotive is your answer. Visit them online at gopromotive.com. So just wanted to welcome Jamie Hasty from SESCO here. I'm not going to try and butcher what SESCO stands for, but a lot of you guys have probably heard her speak. If you were lucky enough to be at the VAA conference down in Virginia, you heard Jamie and I speak, which is where this episode came from. A little bit of background and we'll kind of get into it. Jamie works for a company called SESCO. SESCO is our go-to at Parmelis when we have anything HR, anything employment-related questions. These are the people that I lean on, right? If you ask me, hey, Hunt, do I have to pay this person overtime? I'm not answering that question. Jamie and our team are. So overtime, employment laws, all kinds of stuff that we're going to get into today. But just wanted to first say thank you for coming on, Jamie.
Well, thanks, Hunt. Thank you so much for having me. And to answer your statement or to address your statement, it is the Southeastern Employer Services Corporation. Say that 5 times fast.
There you go. But just like the name entails, it does not mean you have to be in the Southeast. You know, we have clients all over the country and they will know the answer. That's where a lot of this gets tricky. The first thing we're going to get into is overtime laws. It's specifically national. But the reason of why you got to be very careful on listening to shop owners, listening to, people you read on the internet. Some of this stuff is universal all across the nation, right? Cannot do this in America. Some of this stuff is you cannot do it in this state or do it differently in this state. And this is where this stuff gets so in-depth. But let's start with that first one, Jamie, right? We were talking about this before we went live. I had a lot of clients that reached out because they probably got the same notice from the Department of Labor that the Department of Labor was increasing the minimum salary requirements to have someone exempt from overtime. And, you can kind of lead on to why it's getting challenged right now. But kind of let's just start on that of, does it really matter as much on how much someone makes or really what they do when determining if you should pay overtime or not?
Yeah, so many layers to that question, Hunt, and it really is a good one. So yes, we have pending changes to the Department of Labor white collar exemptions. These are full exemptions from overtime, meaning, yes, I have to be paid on a salary, but I also have duties tests that go along with it. And so people are very concerned about this increase in the salary. Keep in mind that from a historical perspective, we went for a very, very long time with it being a very low salary. And then in 2019, it increased to a guaranteed $684 or $85 per week. And now we're seeing it jump up again. Now, there's a lot of confusion out there about exemptions from overtime, and you probably hear it yourself. Oh, so-and-so is a manager. So-and-so is paid on a salary. I don't owe them overtime. Well, that's not how it works. But when we're talking about the automotive service industry, these independent shops, many of whom are individual, family-owned businesses, multi-generational. Certainly we have members that have very large establishments, multi-locations, may even go across state. For many of these, let's just say middle of the road shops, they're really not going to or should be using these exemptions from overtime outside of like their ownership and maybe their general manager. Other than that, nothing else is really going to apply. Why? Because the structure of their organization is not large enough to support having multiple people on multiple executive exemptions from overtime. So that's stance number one. But there are alternatives that we often see with partial exemptions from overtime within this industry. But yes, people are a little concerned. It is a jump in a guaranteed salary, which means if I work half an hour in 1 week or 75 hours in 1 week, I'm guaranteed that salary no matter what. But there's also duties that have to go along with it. You can't just have somebody on salary or give them a fancy title and expect that to just wipe out the overtime requirement. So we are seeing a lot of questions come in from clients nationwide. The DOL change and the increase to the white collar salaried threshold is nationwide. Now, also keep in mind that many other states have a higher requirement on salary thresholds, Chicago, New York, New Jersey, than what this would be. So you always have to comply with state law as well. But this is a federal change. Just as I was sharing with you earlier, last week on May 21st, there actually were 2 court filings against the Department of Labor, as we expected would occur. We saw this last time in 2016, and we anticipated it would happen again here in 2024, that they're challenging the Department of Labor's right to increase or to change the white collar exemptions because of the Code of Federal Regulation and how really regulations come about. DOL has their side and their argument of, hey, we just changed the salary amount. That didn't require us to go through notice of proposed rulemaking and all of these other things. We didn't have to get congressional approval. And these other businesses are saying, well, yes, you did. So there are also, other pieces of those court cases. So we'll see. Time will tell. It was filed out of the Eastern District in Texas, which is the exact same district where the 2016 litigation was filed. My best guess is we're going to have a stay for a little bit. These changes were supposed to occur in July. We'll probably see them stay until probably 2026.
Cool, because last time you said this is not anything new. Everyone kind of expected this to be challenged just like it was in 2016. And what we did see was more or less it came virtually identical on the surface, which I'm sure other stuff was changed. And it became actual law in 2019. So it delayed the start. It did not kind of get rid of it. But just for right now, like people that were doing the mental math, and I was doing the mental math on my calculator because I'm spoiled by having a calculator, the minimum that someone has to make to get this exemption by my calculations is $35,000. So to be clear on this is $35,000 guaranteed, right? So the person could make more than that, but let's say none of it was guaranteed, then none of it would count. So they have to be guaranteed to get at least $680 a week. But this is why, and this is probably where the roles come in, is that just one threshold, right? So you're saying, let's say, and you're about to correct me and saying, Hunt, the way that you look at this is wrong. But the way that I always thought about overtime is they need to be in management. And generally, the easiest thing to argue there is hiring, firing decisions. All right, they're a true general manager. They can hire and fire on this. Great. They check the box. Somehow I was able to convince this person to come work for me for $30,000 a year. That would be a situation where the means test or duties passed, but I wouldn't be able to deem that person exempt from overtime because they make so little. And I think that's the part that always kind of surprised me of like, it's kind of a bit distracting to put out these minimum salaries because they just don't make any sense. Like if you're going to have someone working with that much responsibility or they're in a management position, but you're paying them like $16 an hour, like it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But, I guess you're about to tell me, well, Hunt, it's not just as easy as having hiring and firing decisions, or maybe it is, but that's an extreme situation where, yeah, of course that person does not get overtime.
It is easy and it's not easy. Let's put it that way. So, you're right. Yeah, the threshold is at or around $35,000 currently under the $684 guaranteed per week. let's use your example of hiring in a general manager. We can say, yeah, they can hire and fire. Okay. But there are additional duties tests that go along with that. I have to have 2 or more full-time employees reporting directly to me. I have to have the ability to hire and fire. I have to be primarily managing those direct reports no less than 51% of my time. Coaching, counseling, performance management, all of these things. That's why I said in some of these smaller shops, let's assume, Hunt, that you own a shop and you are the owner and you are there day in and day out. And yeah, you have a general manager and a service manager. But when push comes to shove, because you're there every single day, calling the shots and running the business, who's really in charge? The general manager and the service manager? Or do you have final decision-making power? And so all of these things kind of play in.
Yeah, like is it in title or actual practice?
It's the hierarchy, right? And not to demean or take away from the general manager and the service manager. They can have the ability to make strong recommendations, but it is very much a comprehensive look at not just the money, but the duties and how they all play, but also the size of the organization. Is the owner involved in the day-to-day? Because let me tell you, Department of Labor cannot wrap their head around how in a shop of 6 or 7 people where you can have 3 people salaried exempt, they're going to dig their heels in and say, absolutely not. It doesn't work. The other thing is, yes, the guaranteed base salary. Now, we know, especially in certain positions within the shop, they're production-based, right? So I may give my general manager a $35,000 base, but I'm giving him or her or they an extra $45,000 in commissions. They're getting a percentage of gross profit or gross revenue. So pay plans really do matter too when we're looking at some of these exemptions, because in the current regulation, you can use up to 10% in a bonus or a commission to meet the minimum threshold of salary.
So you're saying if you're a little bit short, so let's say that you came in and said to guarantee at 30 grand, if they were getting enough in commissions and salary, it's like, all right, well, we can use a 10% from that. That puts you up to 40. You're good to go. And so that's the careful thing is it's like, hey, it might not be how much they made, it's how they made it. It might not be who they manage, but are they actually managing? And I think that's the point that really a lot of people forget is like, hey, this is not just paperwork, right? This is kind of the exact opposite of some of the IRS stuff where it's like, well, on paper, that's what it said, so that's what it is. Department of Labor will kind of go down through that and say, that's great that Hunt's business card says general manager. You're there every single day. Like you're calling your service advisor that has virtually 0 management titles here as exempt from overtime, and that couldn't be farther from the truth because you're there day to day. So if you have that small shop, you are still the ultimate boss on it, then I think it's probably safe to say you probably don't have anyone there to exempt from overtime because you are the manager. You are the executive. You have ultimate authority.
Right, exactly. But, again, we have alternative options to look at for service advisors, service technicians, other, warranty type positions or administrative positions. There are alternatives. But to your point, Hunt, if you were the ultimate authority in a smaller shop, then yeah, I'm not going to use the white collar exemptions. I may look at other alternatives for the other positions to kind of reduce my liability for overtime, and because you have to pay overtime on commissions.
Before we get into the, non-discretionary bonuses and stuff like that, we went from the white collar, we went from the executive argument. There's a couple different ways that you can argue someone's exempt. Obviously, for a normal technician or advisor, the white collar exemption is just going to be very hard to fit them into that box. What is the most common thing that you're arguing? Let's use 49 state legal or 48 state legal. We won't use California on this example. But what is the conventional argument behind a technician? Hey, my technicians are flat rate. And so then by default, automatically, do I not need to pay overtime, or is there, again, more to it just there?
Yeah, great question. Definitely not by default. There's more to it there. So flat rate is what we call a commissioned pay plan. It is a 100% commissioned pay plan. So most states allow for a flat rate pay plan as a partial exemption from overtime if, again, you meet certain tests. There are roughly about 15 or so states that do not allow flat rate to be used to exempt from overtime. So again, this goes back to you always have to check your state and your locality Because just because DOL, federal says I can do it, doesn't mean that my state will allow it. Talk about flat rate. So flat rate, when I look at my technicians, they're turning the hours, right? That still requires them to keep a true and accurate time card.
Let's say that again, because this is the one thing I think when we spoke in Virginia that was a shock for everyone. Doesn't matter if you're paying overtime, not paying overtime, flat rate, salary, everyone should be clocking in, clocking out, period. Correct?
Pretty much, yeah. With the exception of a true white-collared exempt, but everybody else, service advisors, technicians, your office staff, everybody should be keeping a time card. If it's on a handwritten time card, great. If it's a punch system, great. Don't care. Write it on a napkin and sign it, as long as it is a true and accurate time record. For sure. So technicians need to keep time records. And under what we call a partial retail 7I exemption, because it's a commissioned pay plan. So retail establishments can use it. And what we're going to do is take the total flat rate hours turned divided by their total clock hours earned or clocked to make sure that it yields no less than 1.5 times minimum wage for every hour that they work. The issue with retail 7I is it's a forward applying exemption. So you have to have a signed written pay plan. There has to be certain language within that pay plan that talks about, look, we're going to make sure you meet these tests no less than every 30 days, but no greater than every year. And then I have to be monitoring that as the office staff, the accountant, the payroll person to make sure they are in fact hitting the test under partial retail 7I. And if I don't, then I either need to bonus them up so that they do and keep them exempt from overtime, or I treat them as overtime eligible and I owe a bunch of back overtime. So there's a lot of compliance issues and people don't realize flat rate doesn't exempt you automatically from overtime. It's a great option. It's a great pay plan. It's a great incentive for these technicians. And it kind of puts us similarly with auto dealers side of things and how they treat their technicians. But it's not always an easy thing to apply. And I have many members and clients of mine that have independent shops where they pay their technicians hourly plus overtime, plus a spiff, plus a bonus, So it all goes back to what works best for your organization, for your region, for your team. I mean, there's a lot of nuance there that you have to kind of take into consideration as well.
Federal minimum wage is 15. How much is it now?
$7.25 still.
Oh, see, I'm in Maryland. So again, you got to be careful because, you'll be put in jail in Maryland if you pay someone $8 an hour, right?
Right.
So federal minimum wage on this, if you're going from so this is going to be the threshold. Nothing is going to be lower than this. So if federal minimum wage is like $7 and you have to pay at least time and a half, let's call it $10 an hour, right?
It's $10.88 actually.
$10.88. There we go. So $11 we're going to round up on here. So if you are saying, am I in the danger zone? You need to take how much you paid that technician in a week and divide it by the amount of hours. So if you paid that person $400, right? Let's say that they're $40 an hour flat rate. They only flag 10 hours. They get a check for $400. You divide that by the 40 hours that they actually worked. Their hourly rate is only $10. So even though you're going of like, hey, I have the 7I, I got retail exemption. You do until you don't, right? Hey, you checked the box there, retail. You checked the box, you had a written thing, perfect. But you didn't look and realize, hey, that person dipped down below. I need to bonus them probably not that much. It'll probably be $20 or $30 to get them over there. A lot of people have to be thinking to themselves, if I got a flat rate guy that I'm giving $400 to, we have a bigger issue. I'm not concerned. The big thing here would be put out of, like, let's use Maryland, for example. Would it be 1.5 times the Maryland overtime? So Maryland, so right there, right? If you're in Montgomery County is more in Maryland, but let's say it's $15 an hour. So then that makes it $22.50. And you can start to see some situations. If you got a technician,
it gets tight.
Yeah, that's making $25, $30 an hour flat rate. You got some bad production weeks. You don't do guarantees. Don't think, oh, it's fine. I'm not even going to be close to 10. It's like, no, maybe you don't have to be above 10 or 11. Maybe you got to be above 22, 23, and in some states, even more.
Right. And so I'm glad you brought that up because as we see states and localities increase their minimum wage, which is not a bad thing, but it does make it difficult to utilize partial retail 7I because you're talking about 1.5 times minimum wage. So if I'm only paying a technician $28 a flat rate hour, and then they're working 45 hours that week and it happens to be a slow week or a slow month, I'm not going to hit my tests. And so that's why you pick what we call a representative period of time to give them a little bit of cushion when we have slow times and really busy times. But at the end of the day, once you get to that end of that representative period, let's say we're using quarters, the end of the first quarter, and it just so happened to be a rough quarter, you're going to have some decisions to make. Either they're going to be non-exempt moving forward, or I'm going to have to pony up some money to bring them above, in Montgomery County, $22.50 per every single clock hour that I work. And for a smaller shop, that may not be feasible. Again, this goes back to you really should be partnering with your CPA, with employment law experts, wage and hour experts to really look at and review your payroll, your application of exemptions, all of these things to make sure that we're in a good spot. Because while payroll is our number one controllable cost, it's also our number one financial liability.
Let's face it, your shop management system is the single most important tool in your shop, period. You need NAPA TRACS because it integrates with all the major players, including NAPA ProLink, Parts Tech, OE RepairLink, Epicor, Tire Connect, Mitchell 1 Pro Demand, and more. NAPA TRACS has leading-edge tools and technology that your shop needs right now. Unlike the other guys, we'll be there after your installation with the best training and support in the business. Your training includes a learning management system that is tailored to each role in your company. Simply put, TRACS was designed and built for shop owners just like you. It all starts when a local representative meets with you to learn about your business to help optimize your shop's workflow, efficiency, and profitability. For over 30 years, NAPA TRACS has made selecting the right shop management system easy by offering the best, most comprehensive SMS in the industry. After all, it's your shop, so it's your choice. Visit us on the web at napatracs.com. That's NAPATRACS.com. Shop owners, are you struggling to find and retain top-tier talent for your automotive shop? Introducing Promotive, on the web at gopromotive.com. With over 40 years of combined industry and recruiting experience, we're the ultimate staffing solution. We go beyond traditional agencies. Our team provides dedicated recruiters and account managers advising on processes, compensation, and benefits. We focus on placing technicians and service advisors with shops that offer the best culture, training, and long-term growth opportunities. Trust our experience to match the right talent to your shop. We carefully select shops that value employee excellence and provide an environment for success. Our dedicated team leads the entire process, leveraging our industry knowledge and expertise. Partner with Promotive and experience their advantage to help you build a high-performing team that drives your shop's growth. Visit gopromotive.com today and let us help find and keep the best talent in the industry. I always say this. Everyone gets so concerned about the IRS. I've never seen anyone go to business from an income tax audit. I have seen people put out of business for employment lawsuits. And it is a lot more common.
Oh, yes, especially in this industry.
Oh, yeah.
A couple of years ago, there were some really good modern tire dealer articles specifically on auto shops that got dinged for not paying overtime correctly with non-discretionary bonuses. And so there was a really good article there, but then there have been many cases, one in New York in particular, that we assisted with, and it was an independent service shop. And their back wage liability was so large in New York. It wasn't willful. They just didn't know. But unfortunately, they had to file bankruptcy and it shut down their business that had multi-generation. And so those are the things that we don't like to see, but people don't realize how truly significant this liability can add up to be. You've got back wages, you've got liquidated damages, you have compensatory damages. If DOL takes you to suit, you've got all of that too. I mean, it can be very, very serious.
Oh, yeah. And the worst case scenario that I know about, like I said, my client did not know that anything was wrong until he got a lawsuit. And it's not just that employee. I mean, not to disparage attorneys here, but these guys make money when they win money in court. So if I am an attorney, I know that Jamie used to work for your shop and we just won a judgment. I'm going to say, Jamie, think of anyone that used to work there, does work there, because if we got it for you, more or less, we've just got a rubber stamp and we can just put people through this. And that's what happened to my client. It's like, hey, settled one, settled two, and then said, I'm never going to be able to get out from underneath this. Like I've had a lot of employees over the years and all coming out of the woodworks. Before we kind of get into it, because, all right, let's say that I'm nervous. We do it to calculate overtime. I want to get into the non-discretionary bonus side of it. Now, just to kind of remind people is if you are not having someone work overtime, if they're not working more than 40 hours in a week, then it doesn't matter how much they make, right? Like you are exempt from paying over.
They have to make at least minimum wage. Yeah.
You got to make minimum wage on there, but hey, the guy's working 35, 36 bucks an hour on it. He might be eligible for overtime, but if he's not working it, you don't need to pay it. And also, like you said, hey, if you fail the testing, that is going forward until you test again, they're going to have to pay overtime. Before we get into, all right, here's how we're going to calculate overtime for these, commission or bonus employees on this. Am I safe enough as an employer to just say, guys, I've looked at this, I'm concerned. And, again, if you look down through this, you'll probably realize there's one or two people that you got to be the most concerned about, right? They're the ones that they don't make enough, they're not consistent enough. Most everyone else is probably going to be either cut and dry, you need to, or you don't. But am I safe as the employer to go and say, you know what? I listened to this episode. I'm concerned. I don't really know if I'm safe or not safe. I don't really have many guys that work overtime anyways. Can I go to my team and say, guys, you're not allowed to work overtime? If you do, then that's on your dime, not mine. Like, how can an employer protect himself from saying, there's no reason I should have a guy working 60 hours and they need to come to me if they're going to try and work over 40 hours?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you asked that because this is going to bring up my point of how important an employee handbook is for policy and procedure. Department of Labor requires that certain things be in writing in your employee handbook. When does my work week start? What's that 24-hour, 7-day period? Because that's how they determine when your week starts and ends for purposes of calculating overtime. You should have an overtime policy in place that says, look, you're not permitted to work overtime unless authorized by me. Now, the double-edged sword is if they work it, I still have to pay it. But it becomes a performance management piece. You need to hold them accountable. But yeah, you can absolutely manage hours down to negate liability. But that's why also having the true and accurate time record is so important because when they write down, I worked 37 and a half hours and they sign their name to it, they've certified those hours are true and accurate.
You brought up a great point there because I think that goes hand in hand with the management of like, well, hey, I'm just going to call, Jamie a manager. It's like, you got to be actually doing this. So yeah, you are allowed to say you cannot work overtime without, express written consent or whatever you want to say on there. But if someone does, then yeah, they, violated your standards. You need to still pay that person overtime. Now you can have a performance review or you can have, whatever comes out of this. But if you think that you're going to put in your handbook, have everyone sign it, that no one can work overtime and still let people work overtime, but not pay them, even if they're not expecting it, you're going to get in big trouble here. You can't just put it on paper. You have to do it. And then also, I would imagine that this is going to be for everyone. So if you have everyone signing a same employee handbook, I got 35 employees. I know Jamie is working overtime. She knows that she's not supposed to, but she still is, and I'm not paying her. Then it kind of brings everyone else into jeopardy because it's like, well, hey, she's not following the standards on this. So are these even standards that everyone else is following or not?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So you teased it there enough. This is the number one thing that people get wrong about calculating overtime. And let's just do a technician because I generally see this more on the technician side than the advisor. But if you pay your person a flat hourly amount, right? Jamie's my technician. She makes $26 an hour, no spiffs, no bonuses, no commissions. Then you can calculate bonus or overtime like you've probably always done, time and a half. If you are a shop that only pays flat hourly, nothing else, you are probably the exception, not the norm, because almost all my clients have some sort of, different gates, buckets, spiffs. If you are the shop that has a little bit extra going on here, this section's for you because I assure you, you are probably calculating overtime wrong. So with that kind of wake-up call to these people, let's say that I got either a performance target. Let's say I got an hours target on it. How does that change my overtime calculation if I'm a shop owner?
Yeah, so great question. And this is where Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division, especially in this industry, really loves to put that nail in the coffin because it's where they can find miscalculations. So basically, if I am paying what we call a non-discretionary bonus, anything that's tied to a metric, attendance, safety, hours worked, hours turned, all of these things, I know that if I hit this goal, I'm going to get this $100 or $200. What people don't realize is that money, whether it's paid weekly, monthly, quarterly, plays into how my overtime is calculated. So remember, Hunt, that overtime is calculated on my regular rate of pay, not my hourly rate. Okay. So basically, when we have, and let's just use an easy example of I get $50 a month or $50 a week, excuse me. And let's say that because I have to use my calculator. Let's say that my normal hourly rate is $20 an hour. Okay. And I work 45 hours that week. So 20 times 40 is $800 for regular time. And I, as the business owner, go ahead and pay overtime at 1.5 times on the 20, right? So that means my overtime rate for the 5 hours that I worked that week is $30 times 5 hours for an extra $150, right? So you've paid me $950 that week. But let's say you gave me a spiff because I sold 4 sets of tires, or I don't know, I upsold something. So in essence, I have to add, I'm still going to calculate my normal 40. So what was it? $20 an hour times 40. So that's 800 plus the $50 in my commission. So that's 850. Now I take that 850 divided by 40 hours. Actually, my regular rate of pay for that week only is $21.25, not $20. So then I take the overtime, the 1.5 times the $21.25. And so I should be calculating those 5 hours of overtime at $31.86 instead of $30. So this is where a lot of owners get themselves in trouble, is because they don't realize you have to include the non-discretionary bonus into the wages earned because it increases the regular rate of pay. You can manually calculate it. There are easier ways to do it with a coefficient table. If you are using an outside HR, IRS, or a payroll system, they can do it for you, but you have to let them know it's not going to be an automatic calculation. They have to be set up correctly. So this is an area where we start seeing that the back wages really, really add up, because when you've got service advisors or technicians that are working 5 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours of overtime, and they're getting $100, $200, $300 every single week, you're talking about double back wage because we didn't pay overtime correctly.
And a big thing on that too is where a lot of people kind of burst your bubble. It's like, well, hey, if you think that you're gaming overtime by saying, well, that's base pay, that's commission, you're missing the mark. Because a big thing is going to be, well, that's not discretionary, that is discretionary. If you say, well, that's part of their pay plan, then that's not discretionary, right? Like you said, you've set up metrics to say, if you do A, B, and C, you are going to get D as a bonus. Really, it would be a lot easier to explain what would be a discretionary. This was a really good quarter for everyone. No specific target that you set, and you just want to get everyone $1,000. That is a discretionary bonus that would not go into this equation. It was the end of year. It was a Christmas. You know what? I'm feeling good about. I'm going to give Jamie an extra $100. That's discretionary. Everything else that you pay them for throughout the year, more or less, is probably not discretionary. And also, you were using kind of smaller examples. There's a lot of people where they do this, and I've seen this. Yeah, their base pay is minimum wage. Their base pay is like $7. They make around $30 an hour because that extra $23 is all in their commissions and bonuses. And it's kind of the opposite of their effective rate for their shop. Your street rate is one thing. Your effective is probably lower. For your overtime consideration, like their official hourly pay of what they actually get paid per hour might be kind of small, but their real hourly is like we were talking about before, flat rate. Take more or less everything that you pay them, divide by the hours that they worked. That is more going to be in line. And yeah, it's try not to get too much into the technical because this is overwhelming, right? And I'll be the first to admit, if you start looking down and you go down through the rabbit hole of what is overtime, how do you calculate it? It can get very, very intimidating. It can get very confusing. And you're going to probably have to utilize a service, especially if you got a bigger company here. One of the things, and I'm not sure if you agree with my sentiment here, if you are paying overtime, you probably are going to have to get away from biweekly or semi-monthly pay because that makes it even more complicated once you go outside of the normal work week. You agree with me or disagree?
Yeah, partially. I actually don't hate biweekly pay. I am not a huge personal fan of semi-monthly just because of the way the 14, 15, 16 days, they ebb and flow. And if you're not really good at calculating the overtime that way, it can really trip you up. Biweekly tends to be a little bit easier, even though it does run a little bit behind, like 1 week behind. At least I can still delineate where my weeks start and end versus sometimes with the semi-monthly, it's 30 days, 25 days. It just gets a little wonky there. But
so you're saying weekly or biweekly? So I guess I'll explain why this is. So let's say that you do biweekly, you get paid every 2 weeks. And so if you were to look at your employee's timesheet and say, well, 2 weeks, all right, they worked 80 hours. This person's not getting overtime. You right there missed the first pitfall.
Well, yeah, each work week stands alone.
Yeah, because overtime is for a week, not for a pay period. So if I worked 80 hours the first week and 0 hours the second week, even though that is full time for the pay, I'm owed 40 hours of overtime.
Correct.
That's where, weekly or biweekly still kind of, you got to do a little bit more research, but it kind of makes it a little bit easier because it's on a normal week. Why I don't like the semi-monthly or where it makes it really hard, like Jamie was saying, is you're probably going to have 2 in 1 day, 2 weeks in 2 days. You're going to have something that is, you're going to have orphan days out there that you're either going to have to use the previous pay to look back and add those two together or the future ones where, again, it can be done. It's not impossible, but it does get a little bit more complicated.
But your CPA and your HR consultant don't like it, so don't do it.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't dislike it. Like I said, we don't really tiptoe in the thing of overtime, but you're just setting yourself up for, you are doing your pay less frequently, so it's less work for you. But with the added work of doing the more calculation overtime, you probably negated that savings, 3 times over.
Yep.
Very cool. So we've done a lot here, went through a lot of it, kind of leave on the last one, which I was really kind of surprised by because I'll put my hand up, right? I'm self-employed and I definitely could have gotten in trouble on this in the past, is when you need to move on from someone. So, hey, I'm in Maryland, right, at will state. So again, state by state specific, this is going to be different rules here. I was always advised, obviously incorrectly, that if you are letting go of a person, you don't necessarily let them know why they are leaving. You say, hey, services are no longer needed. Best of luck, period. What Jamie educated me is, well, you didn't say anything that could get you in trouble, but just because you didn't say anything doesn't really absolve you from future litigation. Because even though I didn't say, hey, Jamie, I'll let you go because I don't like women, the fact that I said, hey, your services are no longer needed does not preclude Jamie from filing a lawsuit to say, hey, I was fired because I was a woman. Like, really, it doesn't change my liability at all. And in some cases could make it worse because the fact that I'm not saying a reason allows you to fill in the blank and come into the reason. So I guess kind of address that of how should, if you need to make a change with someone, how should this be done? And is there anything that you would really say, do not do this in any circumstance?
Yeah, it's always best practice to separate based off of policy and procedure. Hunt, to your point, yes, we are an at-will state. At-will is great. You can quit with or without notice. I can fire you with or without notice, with or without reason, because I don't like purple today and you're wearing a purple shirt, whatever the reason may be. The problem is that it doesn't protect me from unemployment, EEOC charges, Human Rights Act charges, any of the things that people could throw, like spaghetti on a wall and see what sticks. And what I often see too is when we use at will, the paperwork, if there is any in the file at all, also says at will. So when I go 300 days from now to defend a federal Department of Labor charge of discrimination, I have nothing in the file to pull that you had attendance issues, that I actually let you go because the wheels of Mrs. Smith's car fell off when she was driving down the road and you were her technician and you just rotated the tires. So, you really want to make sure that you're always backing it up based off of policy and procedure, that you've got your progressive discipline in place and it's documented well, because at the end of the day, everything that we do as a business owner must be defended.
So I think you made a really good point there is people are probably already doing this. They're just not having the proper documentation, which is where they're getting burned, right? Because especially in today's market, I mean, it's a tight market. So if I have a technician that's showing up, doing a good job, good culture around, I'm not going to let this person go. that person I want to fire or not fire, but no longer need their services probably isn't showing up on time. Maybe is making mistakes, maybe costing my money, maybe damaging stuff, maybe lying, maybe abusing customers, employees. And that's why I'm getting rid of it. But where you're saying that this gets burned is 2 years down the road, unless you have paperwork, unless you have, hey, this is the text message that they sent to the customer, using foul language or whatever, it's just going to be your word against theirs. And we've seen this time and time again. They're generally going to side on the employee side from what I've seen.
Yep, they will.
So you're saying, hey, that's great. And you still don't need to give that person a reason, right? Even if you say, hey, it's, Mrs. Smith's car. This is the 15th time this has happened. You still don't have to give that person a reason, but you better have the documentation that if they do come and challenge this, think about it this way, right? Put all your stuff together and put this documentation in front of someone that's never been into your shop or maybe a shop whatsoever. Is that alone enough for someone to be like, oh yeah, I can clearly see why Hunt let Jamie go. I mean, this is atrocious. And if not, then you could still be in some trouble there. Yeah, I think that's a really good point of, hey, you are probably firing this person for a reason. Make sure that you show your work, keep your documentation here, because this is really where this all comes down. Like we're talking about the timesheets. Hey, that's great. You need to prove that they didn't work overtime. If you don't have a timesheet, there was no timesheet given out there, and that employee says, well, I was there 50 hours a week. If they really weren't there at all, obviously they're going to have to prove it. But if someone says, hey, I average 45 hours a week and you don't have any time clock to prove otherwise on it, then you're kind of done. You're guilty because that employee kept their own time. They just came out and said, I did this much. Unless I have the official time card on there to say, no, I see you working 38 hours. I think I'm dead in the water, aren't I?
Yeah, absolutely. It's their word against yours. You have to be able to defend every single thing. Time records, separations, employment decisions, promotions, you name it. It is your responsibility to be able to support why you did or did not do something. And DOL, if it's not there, will side with the employee.
Guys, as a reminder, you need to have a handbook, right? And this is why it's not only important to have a handbook, but don't use someone else's handbook and change the name.
Thank you. Thank you. You need your own handbook.
Get a real handbook for your business. And again, it's not just about the idea, it's in practice. That handbook is a handbook. Hold people accountable to it. And also the biggest thing that I've seen for a lot of people, and I'll let you kind of give your last remarks or last word of advice, you're the boss of the company, right? Your name's on the door. It's your rules. So it's to a certain extent your way or the highway. If your employee says, no, boss, I don't care, I'm going to do this, this, and this, a lot of the people that I've seen have been burned, have been trying to help out their team. And at the end of the day, they're the ones that get in trouble for this. So if you're going to set these rules, you're going to set these standards, hold your team accountable to it, whether they're the manager, whether they're the guy that sweeps the floors. Everyone needs to be created, or treated fairly and treated equally here.
Yeah, absolutely. Remember, employees, even if they may ask and say, hey, I want to be on salary, I don't want the overtime, or hey, I don't want to wear my PPE, I'm good, whatever it may be, they can't waive their rights. So even when we think, hey, this is what our employee wants, it's helping them out, it's, we have good intent here. If it's not what is written in policy, please don't go against it. It's truly, truly important that we be fair and consistent across the board. So many good things to talk about, but not enough time. So maybe we can do a part 2 sometime soon.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll have a bunch of people coming back and panicking. And like I was saying before, no, this episode is not to show you how to calculate overtime. This is not to show you that you are or are not calculating it correctly. If anything, like when we spoke down at VAA, this should just be a wake-up call of, hey, they are looking at this stuff. You might have looked at this 5-10 years ago. The rules have changed. Reach out to professionals. Reach out to SESCO. Like I said, if you're a client of mine, you have access to SESCO to be able to run these things by them. And wouldn't you rather know? Like, hey, you could still choose to not like the answer that SESCO gave you. Jamie and I were laughing before of, a lot of times they bear the brunt of the bad news of, no, that person needs to get paid overtime. Well, I'm going to go broke. I didn't say it was going to be a good thing for you. I didn't think it was going to make you more money. That's the rules. So right or wrong, it's probably better to know where you stand.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Jamie. And yeah, I think this was going to be immensely helpful for everyone.
Thanks, Hunt. Appreciate your time. And as always, it's a pleasure to chat with you.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you.
You've been listening to Business by the Numbers with Hunt Demarest on the Aftermarket Radio Network. Follow Hunt on your favorite podcast listening app. Let him know what you'd like him to cover. His email is in the show notes. Hunt is all for advancing the aftermarket.